shouldn't be a place for one person. It should be a place for lots of people.
Boleskine House, as we know it, was probably commissioned in the late 18th century.
Although perhaps beginning his plans for it in the late 1700s, Boleskine House was completed by Archibald Campbell Fraser in 1809.
And we know 1809 because we see some of the first descriptions of it around that time. Now, someone more, I guess, more famous is his father. His father was Simon Fraser, 11th Lord Lovat.
Nicknamed the Old Fox, Fraser was a Scottish Jacobite and chief of the Fraser family, the family that occupied Inverness Shire in the Scottish Highlands. He is known in history for being an early supporter of the Hanover rule in England, but then deflected and supported the Stuart claim to the throne and therefore joined the Jacobite cause during the uprisings in the mid-18th century.
He was caught by the British, brought to the Tower of London and tried for treason and later beheaded. And anyone who's familiar with Diana Gabaldon's novels and then later TV adaptation Outlander, the Frasers play a pretty significant part, and they were a pretty significant family in this area. So Simon Fraser's son, by his second wife, Archibald Fraser, is the one responsible for commissioning the house.
This Fraser is known in history for holding a seat in British Parliament for Inverness Shire, serving as consul in Tripoli and Algiers, and also for the reversal of a parliamentary act that prohibited the wearing of traditional Scottish dress in Scotland.
Kind of a big deal after the Jacobites were squashed. There was a lot of kind of repressive acts that kind of went towards a lot of the traditional Scottish heritage kind of stuff, including the dress. So he was one of the people that tried to reverse that. That's kind of some of its early history, but we are finding some very interesting archaeological stuff about it now that the fire has pretty much stripped everything away, all the plasterings and everything that we wouldn't have been able to see. And the house has always been in private ownership, so we would have never been able to have the opportunity to go into someone's private home and do all this archaeological research on this house. As you can see, it's got some of these sort of Italian-style grandiose columns, and like these are some of the more interesting features of the house, with these large windows inside, although a lot of it's burnt away now. There were some large columns that kind of made for a very grandiose sort of entrance. Now, the primary construction is a granite construction, and you'll see some modern additions. For instance, if you turn the camera over and you look at this room, this is obviously a much more modern addition, you can tell, because it's all concrete. It's all concrete built. And then you have the render, you'll see there. And then when we look at some of the older parts of the house, you'll see granite. So these are kind of some of the things that tell you just when the extensions of the house were sort of built. Archibald owned it. It went through his family in the 19th century, and then in 1899, Aleister Crowley bought it.
Boleskine House is most famous in history as the location where Aleister Crowley performed an intensive magical rite known as the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage.
Now, the reason he bought the house was he was looking for a specific house that had specific descriptions to be able to do what is known in 19th century fin de siècle occultism as the Abramelin working, or this working called the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage. And basically what this text is it comes from several centuries earlier, and it was translated by one of Crowley's colleagues in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, Samuel McGregor Mathers. Mathers translated this work, and basically it's very typical for a work of its time. Let's say late 15th century, early 16th century, kind of in the realm of the Ars Notoria, which is basically a collection of different works that kind of talk about celestial magic, or calling forth echelons of spirits and stuff in order to kind of constrain them to do the magician's will, which they prostrate themselves in prayer and pray to the Almighty God, and so on and so forth. So the Abramelin working is kind of typical of this for that period of writing, especially in esoteric literature. It involves a very extensive ritual of like prayer, fasting, devotion, devotional exercise, and all this stuff, in which you are supposed to do it in complete seclusion.
Crowley recounted in his Confessions, searching far and wide for such a place, and I quote from his Confessions: "The first essential is a house in a more or less secluded situation. There should be a door opening to the north from the room of which you make your oratory. Outside this door you construct a terrace covered with fine river sand. This ends in a quote-unquote lodge where the spirits may congregate. It would appear the simplest thing in the world for a man with 40,000 pounds who is ready to spend every penny of it on the achievement of this purpose to find a suitable house in a very few weeks. But a magical house is as hard to find as a magical book to publish. I scoured the country in vain. Not till the end of August 1899 did I find an estate which suited me. This was the manor of Boleskine and Appertife, on the southeast side of Loch Ness, halfway between Inverrigting and Foyers. By paying twice as much as it was worth, I got it, gave up my flat, and settled down at once to get everything in order for the great operation, which one is told to begin at Easter."
Now, when I say long, it's not just like all day. We're talking about the actual instruction of this ritual requires you to be secluded and go into these daily practices for like 7-8 months, maybe 9 months. So it's a very extensive ritual. The preliminaries involve lots of fasting, lots of daily prayer, lots of meditation, lots of seclusion, and also a series of calling forth a sort of number of echelons of spirits that will that the person practicing will constrain, and then that helps them keep all these nasty malignancies at bay so that they can do the proper thing, which was to talk to one's holy guardian angel. That was the end goal. So Crowley decided to be brave and try to start this this ritual, but in his younger years, I guess in his older years too, he had a habit of just leaving on a whim, going and traveling the world and stuff. So he got to the first part, which was calling forth these spirits and everything, and then he got called off to Paris. That's kind of where some of that story comes from. Crowley inherited a lot of money from his family, and then nearly spent it all by the middle of his life, or a little bit earlier. So he actually was strapped for cash and had to sell Boleskine in 1913, which he handed it over to the organization he was running at the time, the Ordo Templi Orientis, and then that was strapped for cash, and basically sold that off sold that estate off in 1918. And then it's gone through a number of hands since then, and we can kind of talk a little bit more about that. This was Crowley's oratory room. This is where he did the Abramelin work. Now, it's very difficult. You can't get inside right now. It's completely barred, so we're going to have some real professionals to clear that out before we can get in there. But this would have been the room that Crowley would have done the Abramelin work in. But this here faces due north. And because it's on an elevated position, we're starting to hypothesize that these principal rooms, just the three principal rooms here, might have predated possibly Archibald Fraser. It could have been the presence of a military installation, since there was so much trouble going on around this period in the 18th century. You could have a very good view of the loch, obviously without the trees, of anything coming down from Inverness. Now we know that there were roads being built around the mid 1700s with General Wade is when he built this road, General Wade's military road. So he had a hut maybe a mile or so down the way. Now we have some old stables there as well. So obviously it could have very well been possible that we had some military installation here, and this could have been one particular thing that was standing maybe before, but we're still, I don't want to make definite statements about that because we're still looking, these are just running hypotheses right now. We could be wrong. No, but there's a lot of ghost stories about the place. There's the old head rolling down the corridor, which apparently Jimmy Page's friend when he was staying here, Malcolm Dent, heard.
There's a story that concerns a rock and roll legend who owned a spooky house. Actually, the story is about the friend of said rock and roll legend who asked to watch over said spooky house.
Crowley also talked about it, and apparently the rolling head, which was Simon Fraser, that was the decapitated head, was rolling up and down the corridor, and Crowley would talk about hearing that as well.
Every now and again, the